Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into a book today called Marriage Matters by Conrad Reicher. It's a man's guide to navigating systemic discrimination and protecting your rights in the UK. It really digs into some tough questions that I think a lot of our listeners are probably thinking about too, especially when we're talking about men's experiences with marriage. What's the history there? What are the laws like?
Yeah, this book really tackles some sensitive topics head on. Riker goes way back and looks at how things used to be, like how society viewed marriage and how the laws were actually set up, and how sometimes, maybe a lot of times, those laws and ideas actually ended up putting men at a disadvantage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like one of the examples that really hit me was the stuff about England before 1882. Back then when a woman got married, all her property automatically went to her husband. It's crazy to think about how different things were, but it also makes you wonder, like how much of that old way of thinking is still hanging around today? Like maybe it's affecting how we view marriage even now.
That's a really interesting point. Those specific laws are gone, but the way we see marriage and the roles that husbands and wives play has definitely been shaped by that history. Raker's point is that we need to understand that history so we can see how those old patterns and biases might still be affecting things today, especially in places like family courts.
Oh yeah, the family court system is a huge one. A lot of men I talk to have major concerns about how family courts work. And Riker, he doesn't hold back. He throws out some pretty shocking stats. Get this, in 2018 and 2019, 91% of custody arrangements ended up with the kids living mainly with their mother. 91%. That's a crazy imbalance.
Yeah, it definitely makes you stop and think.
And then he shares this story about Mark. This guy, he's a successful businessman, a loving father, but the court denied him custody just because they felt, and I quote, kids need their mothers more. It just makes you wonder, are these just isolated cases?
Yeah.
Or is there something deeper going on? Like, is the system itself biased against men?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Riker seems to think there's more to it than just a few bad apples. He talks about this thing called the Duluth model, which a lot of family courts use to figure out if there's been domestic violence. But this model has been criticized a lot because it basically assumes that the man is always the abuser and the woman is always the victim, which, let's be honest, isn't always the case.
It's like we're still not really comfortable talking about men as victims of domestic violence. Riker's not afraid to talk about it, and I think that's important. But where do you think this bias comes from? Riker points to some pretty radical feminist ideas. He thinks they're affecting the laws and how society views men in general.
He definitely explores that idea. He says these ideologies, while they're pushing for equality, might accidentally create a system where men are basically seen as guilty until proven innocent, especially in cases of domestic disputes or custody battles. It's a really tangled issue, not easy to unravel.
Definitely not. And it gets even harder when you start talking about the financial side of things. It's not just the emotional toll of divorce or separation, it's the money too. Riker tells this story about Mick, a guy who ended up losing his financial stability after a divorce. And it just highlights how devastating it can be to go through the legal system without the right knowledge and support.
Yeah, you're hitting on a major point there. Riker really stresses how crucial it is to understand the child maintenance laws here in the UK. He argues the system, while it's meant to help kids, can sometimes put an unfair burden on men, even in situations like job loss, which nobody can control. He talks about John, who actually lost his home because he couldn't keep up with child maintenance payments after losing his job.
That's just awful. It makes you realize how real that fear is for a lot of guys. That fear of being stuck in a system that feels like it's working against you. And a system that's not really set up to be flexible or understanding.
And that's exactly where understanding your legal rights comes in. Riker's big on men educating themselves, really learning about their rights. And he says, get a good lawyer, someone who really knows this stuff, someone who specializes in men's issues within the family court system. He's basically saying knowledge is power, especially when you're dealing with a system that can feel like it's rigged against you.
So it sounds like having the right lawyer can make all the difference. But then there's the emotional side of things. Divorce and separation are rarely clean breaks. There's always baggage. And Riker doesn't shy away from some of the darker stuff, like paternity fraud and emotional manipulation.
Yeah, those are heavy topics for sure. He even uses the term emotional terrorism to describe how some people, often women, might try to control or manipulate their partner. He tells the story about Charles, who was constantly being accused, shamed, and manipulated by his wife, Diana. The toll it took on his self-esteem, his mental well-being was just devastating.
Those stories are tough to hear, but I think it takes guts for Riker to bring them to light, because it shows that men can be victims of manipulation and abuse, even if society doesn't always want to see it and talk about it.
Absolutely. And what makes it worse is that those tactics, they're often subtle and hard to spot. It can make it really difficult to recognize what's happening and even harder to stand up for yourself. Riker talks about gaslighting, where someone twists reality to make the victim doubt their own sanity. It's scary stuff.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder how often this kind of thing actually goes on. He also talks about love bombing, where the manipulator showers their partner with affection and then just yanks it away as a way to control them.
It's like a classic cycle of abuse.
Yeah.
And it can leave men feeling so confused, trapped, and emotionally exhausted. And that's why Riker's book is so important, because it validates the experiences of men who might be feeling isolated and not knowing what to do about what they're going through.
It's like this book is a wake-up call. It's not just about legal rights. It's about understanding the power dynamics and manipulation that can happen in relationships, especially for guys who might not even realize it's happening.
Yeah, and it's about giving them the tools to see those patterns, protect themselves, and ultimately build relationships that are healthy and fulfilling.
So we've talked about the historical stuff, potential bias in the family courts, financial implications, and the emotional toll of manipulation and abuse. It seems like Riker's painting a pretty bleak picture of the challenges men face in marriage. But does he offer any hope? Does he give us anything to work with?
Oh, absolutely. He doesn't leave us hanging with all that doom and gloom. In fact, the second half of the book is all about solutions, about strategies men can use to navigate these challenges and actually come out stronger on the other side.
That's what we want to hear. So let's take a quick break and then dive into those solutions in part 2 of our deep dive. So before we jump to the break, we were talking about some pretty heavy stuff, like the emotional manipulation that can happen in relationships and how the family courts sometimes seem to be stacked against men. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? Riker does offer some solutions in his book, some ways that men can protect themselves and come out of these situations in a better place.
Yeah, he doesn't just leave us hanging there feeling helpless. A big part of his book is about strategies, about how men can use the system, even if it's imperfect, to their advantage. One of the things he really emphasizes is understanding the legal side of things and using it to protect yourself.
Makes sense. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to legal battles.
Exactly. And one of the most practical things he talks about is documentation. Like, seriously, document everything. Conversations, agreements, incidents of abuse, anything that could be useful as evidence later on. Don't wait till things blow up and then try to piece it all together. Be proactive.
So build a strong foundation from the start, just in case.
Exactly. And finding a good lawyer is key too. Not just any lawyer, but someone who specializes in men's rights and really understands the ins and outs of family law.
Yeah, it seems like having the right legal representation can make a huge difference. Someone who's in your corner and knows how to fight for you in a system that can often feel stacked against men.
He even gives tips on how to find a good lawyer. Look for someone who's got a good track record of representing men in similar cases. Don't be afraid to interview a few different lawyers before you choose one. And ask the tough questions. Find out about their experience and how they approach these kinds of cases.
It's like he's saying, don't just settle for the first lawyer who picks up the phone. Do your homework, be picky, and find someone who you really trust to represent you.
Right. And don't just rely on your lawyer to know everything. Riker says men need to educate themselves too. Learn about your legal rights and options when it comes to things like child custody arrangements, dividing up property, and spousal support. The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to advocate for yourself and get a fair outcome.
It's about becoming an active participant in your own case,
Right.
not just a passive bystander hoping for the best.
Exactly. And it's not all about fighting it out in court either. Riker also suggests exploring other ways to resolve conflicts, like mediation or arbitration. These are methods that happen outside of the traditional court system.
Oh, interesting. So what's the advantage of going that route?
Well, Riker thinks those approaches can be a bit more flexible, less confrontational. It's less about winning and losing and more about finding a solution that works for everyone involved, which can save a lot of stress, heartache, and money in the long run.
Makes sense. Nobody wins in a long, drawn-out court battle. Everyone just ends up exhausted and resentful.
Exactly. And Riker gives examples of how this has worked for other men, how they use these alternative methods to reach fair settlements for things like child custody, property division, and spousal support. But let's be real, even with the best legal strategy, going through a divorce or separation is incredibly stressful, emotionally draining. So how does Riker address that side of things? The mental and emotional toll it takes on men.
Yeah, that's a big part of the picture. You can have the best lawyer in the world, but if you're not taking care of yourself, it's not going to do much good.
Absolutely. And Riker really emphasizes the importance of mental health and building resilience. He says that being emotionally healthy is crucial for men going through these challenges. It's what allows you to make good decisions, stand up for yourself, and move on in a positive way.
It's like he's saying taking care of your mental health isn't a luxury, it's essential, especially when you're dealing with such a difficult and often adversarial situation.
He encourages men to get therapy, join support groups, and make time for self-care. You know, things like exercise, meditation, spending time in nature, whatever works for you. He even challenges the whole strong and silent idea of masculinity, saying that asking for help isn't weak, it's actually a sign of strength and self-awareness.
It's about time we break free from that old stereotype, right? It does so much damage. It forces men to bottle up their emotions and just suffer in silence.
And that can lead to isolation, depression, all sorts of problems. Riker's advocating for a much healthier approach, one that recognizes that our mental, emotional, and physical health are all connected.
So it's not just about individual coping mechanisms, it's about building a support system too.
Right.
Having people you can rely on.
Exactly. And he talks a lot about the importance of male friendships, of having those guys in your life who you can connect with, share your experiences with, and get support from. He even brings up positive examples of male friendship. Like, remember how close David Beckham and Tom Cruise are?
Yeah, they seem to have a really solid bond.
It's a good reminder that we don't have to go through these things alone. There's strength in having other guys who get it, who've been there too.
For sure. Having a strong support network can make all the difference.
Riker encourages men to prioritize those friendships, make time for them, be open and honest about what you're going through, and support each other. So we've talked about legal strategies, emotional resilience, supportive friendship. It seems like Riker's advocating for a multi-pronged approach. He's saying, equip yourself with knowledge, build your resilience, and surround yourself with good people. And don't be afraid to challenge the systems and narratives that are working against you.
It's a powerful message of self-reliance, but also of collective action. It's recognizing that while you can't always control what life throws at you, you can control how you respond to it.
And that by working together, supporting each other, and pushing for change, we can create a world that's more fair and just for everyone, for ourselves and for future generations of men.
Riker also talks about some bigger societal shifts that he thinks are contributing to the problems men face in marriage. Things like how the dating scene has changed and what he calls the rise of hypergamy. This is a pretty complex and controversial topic.
They are. We'll get into all that after a quick break. Stay with us.
So we're back and ready to jump into some of the big societal trends that Riker thinks are impacting men's experiences in marriage. He gets into some pretty hot button issues like how the dating scene works these days and this thing he calls hypergamy.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting and maybe a bit controversial. Riker's argument is that women now, more than ever, they're looking for men with higher status and more money. And that's tied to some feminist ideas that have shifted things away from the traditional marriage and family model. And he says a lot of men are feeling lost because of it, like they don't know where they fit in anymore.
It's a fascinating idea. But is he saying women only care about a man's bank account? That seems a bit simplistic, doesn't it?
He's not saying it's the only thing women care about, but he does think it's become a much bigger factor in modern dating. And he's got some data and stories to back that up. He thinks this shift in what women are looking for is causing some real frustration for men who are trying to find a committed long-term relationship.
It does make you think about how societies change. Women are working more, they're financially independent. That's got to have some impact on the dating scene, right? So is Riker saying it's a bad thing that women are pursuing careers and independence, like it's somehow hurting men?
He's careful not to frame it as a negative thing for women, but he is concerned about how it's affecting men. He says that a lot of men feel like they're playing a game where the rules keep changing, and that those old ideas of what it means to be a man, to be a provider, those aren't valued the same way anymore.
So it's like a whole new playing field. But does he offer any advice for men who are trying to navigate this new world of dating?
He does. He tells men to focus on themselves, on self-improvement and personal growth, on building those qualities that women find attractive. He says that if you work on yourself, if you develop your emotional intelligence, if you have a strong sense of who you are, you'll naturally become more attractive as a partner. And you'll be able to handle the ups and downs of dating with more confidence.
So it's not about trying to fit into some outdated stereotype of masculinity. It's about being the best version of yourself, no matter what society says.
Exactly. He talks about following your passions, taking care of yourself physically and mentally, learning to communicate well, and being responsible with your money. It's about becoming a well-rounded person, someone who's attractive on the inside and out.
That's a pretty empowering message, actually. It's not about blaming women or complaining about how society's changed. It's about taking responsibility for your own life and becoming the man you want to be.
And it's about understanding that relationships take work. They take self-awareness and a willingness to adapt as things change. It's not always easy.
That seems to be a recurring theme in this book. Taking control of your own life, making your own choices, and being responsible for your own well-being, not just sitting back and letting life happen to you.
Right. It's about becoming an active participant in your own life, shaping your own destiny.
It's a message of empowerment, of not just surviving, but thriving, even when things are tough.
He keeps reminding us that knowledge is power. The more you understand about how things work, the better decisions you can make, and the more confident you'll feel in handling those tough
And it's not just about what individuals can do. Riker also calls for some bigger societal shifts, more understanding between men and women, more empathy, more balance.
He wants to see more open and honest conversations about the challenges men are facing, and he wants to challenge those ideas and stories that are contributing to men being marginalized.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into marriage matters. We talked about history, the dating scene today, legal stuff, emotional resilience, individual action, and societal change.
It's been a fascinating look at a topic that's really complex and often sparks a lot of debate. And even though Riker's book focuses on the UK, a lot of what he says applies to men everywhere.
Absolutely. If you want to dig deeper into all this, definitely check out Riker's book, Marriage Matters, A Man's Guide to Navigating Systemic Discrimination and Protecting Your Rights in the UK. You can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
It's a book that'll make you think. It might challenge some of your assumptions and help you see things from a new perspective. And hopefully it will empower you to make positive changes in your own life and in the world around you.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.